Empires throughout history can only exist when powers know how to navigate conflict and negotiate treaties, how to make both war and peace. In the ancient world, one kind of agreement was called a covenant, a contract with distinct responsibilities and consequences. And the rituals used to establish these covenants told of the ruthless and violent ways empires held their power. One ancient Hittite inscription dating to around the mid-13th century BCE describes a purification rite performed by soldiers after being defeated in battle. It is known as the ritual between the pieces, and it reads, "Behind the river, they sever a human, a billy goat, a puppy, and a piglet. On one side they set halves, and on the other side they set the other halves. Then, before the gate, on one side they burn a fire, and on the other side they burn a fire. Then the troops walk through." While scholars have understood this text to be describing the format of the ritual, what it actually means has been debated. A religious sacrifice would slaughter an animal to be eaten and dedicated, but this slaughter was for the purpose of setting a stage. The splitting of the bodies is a prop. Why split these animals in two and walk through them? Several hundred years later, a prophet named Jeremiah references this exact same ritual when admonishing King Zedekiah and the people of Jerusalem. Having dishonored the promise they made to their God by not setting their enslaved people free, a punishment was now in order. "Those who have violated my covenant and have not fulfilled the terms of the covenant they made before me, I will treat like the calf they cut in two and then walk between its pieces." Jeremiah is saying that the purification ceremony of cutting animals in two represented a very real material term of the agreement. The ritual communicates that if one party does not uphold their end of the compact, they will end up just like the animals they walked through. As the animals were cut, so too will they be cut. The ritual between the pieces is enacting a contract that seals the fate of both parties quite literally in blood. In Genesis, God calls a man by the name of Abram out of Ur, a culturally rich and cosmopolitan city in ancient Mesopotamia, to be the agent of blessing to the entire world. To do so, Abram would need to walk blamelessly and upright in the sight of God and people. In return, Abram would receive honor, a favorable reputation as a man of faithfulness, and be recognized as a source of blessing to all of humanity. Understandably, Abram is uneasy about all of this and asks God for reassurance. In reply, this God doesn't simply say, "Take my word for it," but rather initiates a ritual. In Genesis 15, we read, "He said to him, 'Bring me a heifer, 3 years old, a female goat, 3 years old, a ram, 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon.' He brought him all these and cut them in two, laying each half opposite the other. But he did not cut the birds in two. And when birds of prey came down on the carcasses, Abram drove them away." This account indicates that Abram was certainly familiar with the Hittite ritual of purification and covenant making. The only thing left to do was walk through the pieces to cut the deal. But the mention of the carrion birds, the scavengers, is a narrative way to say that Abram was hesitant. He was taking his time. The story elaborates the dreadful fear that petrified Abram. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram. and a deep and terrifying darkness descended upon him. Perhaps in a moment of sober consideration, Abram knew that in covenant with an almighty power, he was not going to be able to uphold his end of the deal. He was sure to fail at walking blamelessly and upright. He knew that if he were to walk through the pieces, he would seal his fate in death. But this story describes this God as doing something never before conceived. This God walks through the pieces twice. Once to cover for any divine failure, and a second time to cover Abram's failure. In other words, God takes Abram's place. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, "To your descendants I give this land." Fire is well understood as a metaphorical symbol of God. Two images of fire, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch, indicate that God walks through twice. That phrase, made a covenant, is the Hebrew phrase karat Adonai et Avram berit, meaning the Lord and Abram cut a covenant. This is one of the first instances in our human conception of the divine in which the deity would bear the consequences of human failure, in which God would voluntarily suffer the punishment that was meant for mere mortals. It was a widely common idea that a divine entity would intervene in human affairs, but the idea that a God would willingly suffer the consequences of human action so humanity could be blessed and flourish, this is one of the most astonishing, counterintuitive, and transformational ideas in the history of human religion. And this idea would continue to be foundational through the traditions and practices of this faith, through the principles of redemption and forgiveness and grace, humility and mercy. Because on that day, the Lord cut a covenant with Abram.